Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us again tonight. Come on in. Thank you so much again for joining us tonight. It's a real pleasure to be able to present this fourth one in the series. Rabbi Hassan presented the first three, and we're very, very thankful and grateful to him for the first three presentations. Tonight's presentation is going to be one of those questions that many people struggle with. And for many people, not only do they struggle with it, but it becomes almost a stumbling block to their emunah, to their belief. And that's the question of why do bad things happen to good people? Okay? So I'm going to be saying some of the things over here are my own ideas. Some of the things are ideas I've seen in other places. Please feel free to ask any questions. But maybe if we could try, unless the question is really, really relevant to the point that I'm making, if we can try to wait to the end with asking the questions, it's just going to keep the flow going and make sure that other people don't get lost in it. Okay, so let me start with the following. Okay, the question of why do bad things happen to good people has a fancy name as theodicy, and it's something where we say that this is one of the oldest questions in the book. Okay, for the longest time, this is a question that people have been asking again and again. Why do bad things happen to good people? And the question is a valid question. So much so, it's a valid question that you'll find, number one, Abram asked the question when he has a conversation with God about Sodom. So he's speaking about Sodom. We'll see the quotes very soon. But Abram turns to God and he says to God, hey, that's not fair. That's not right. Okay? So it sounds very weird for Abram to turn to God and to say, that doesn't sound fair. Because you'd expect that kind of conversation to be happening between maybe a child and a parent, but you don't expect that kind of conversation or that kind of wording to be issued to God. But you find it not only with Abram, you'll find Moshe Rabbeinu after the golden calf asked the same question. He also says, God, why does this happen? Why are there bad things happening to good people? Also, you have the prophet Jeremiah and King Solomon discussing this. So I'd like to show you some of the... Right, good evening, come on in. I'd like to show you some of the sources inside. We're going to see them. They have an original and a translation. This clicker is not working so well for me, but we're going to try to see what we can do with it. Okay, so we have over here, if you can see it, I even have a pointer. So this is Genesis 18:23. Sorry, I didn't know how it was going to show up on the wall. If I turned off the light, you'd probably be able to see it better, but a lot of people would nod off. So I'm going to keep that. I must tell you, I've seen that. When I turn off the light, I've done that sometimes. Like I've spoken with the lights off, you turn off the light, and everyone's like, that was wonderful, wonderful, What a great snooze. Okay, so you have over here, you have Vayikash Avram Ayoma Haftis Betzadik Rasha. Avram comes forward and says, will you sweep away the innocent along with the guilty? God says to Avram, I'm going to be destroying Sodom. And Avram Avinu turns to God and he says, hey God, that's not fair. Are you going to kill all of the tzaddikim, all of the righteous people together with the people that aren't righteous? With the evil, with the wicked people? Maybe there's 50, maybe there's 45 righteous people, 30, 20, 10. Maybe save the entire city, or at least save those people. But it doesn't seem fair. Just because the majority is no good does not mean that we therefore have to destroy the entire city. Those people that are righteous deserve to live, and those people that are not righteous, maybe they deserve to die. But certainly the righteous people don't deserve to die as well. Okay? That's the question being asked by Avraham Avinu to God. Then you have over here as well, Exodus 33:13. God, this is actually in this week's parasha, God had just, Moshe Rabbeinu just made through the golden calf, God had just forgiven them, and Moshe Rabbeinu then says, Ve'aton now, im motzasichem einecha, now that I've gained favor in your eyes, pray let me know, oh wow, your ways, that I may know you and continue your favor, consider too that this nation is your people. What does that mean, let me know your ways? What does that mean? What do you want to know? What are God's ways? So the Gemara explains what God's ways are, that Moshe Rabbeinu turned to God and he said, I don't understand. There are righteous people and things are great for them. There are other righteous people and things are horrible. There are wicked people who have a great life, and there are wicked people that have a terrible life. And so therefore it seems that there is no consistency going on over here. What is going on? Explain it to me, God. What are your ways? Okay, now we move on to Jeremiah. Over here, Jeremiah 12:1, and you can't see it, but it says, you will win, O Lord, if I make a claim against you. However, he still says, I shall present charges against you anyway. And he asks a question, Madua derech Rishon tzalecha? Shalvu kol bagdei baged. Why does the way of the wicked prosper? Why are the workers of treachery at ease? Meaning, he's also asking the same question. I don't understand what's going on over here. You have wicked people and life is really good. Why do the wicked prosper? This is also being asked over here by one of the greatest prophets. Not necessarily some kind of heretic, but one of the prophets that actually is giving prophecy from God is saying, God, I don't get this. What is going on? Okay? And then we move on to over here. You have in Ecclesiastes that we mentioned over here again. He says, well, we'll leave out the first sentence, we'll get to the second sentence. Yeshev ashenatz ala aretz, which says, here's a frustration that occurs in the world. Asher yesh tzadikim asher megelim k'maser shayim. There are tzadikim that deserve or that get what the Rasha deserves. The yesh shayim, and there are evil people, shemegelim k'maser tzadikim. And they seem to have the life that we would have thought would have been set aside for the person who was a tzadik. That's frustration. I don't get it. I don't understand it. Why is it, says King Solomon, that you have tzaddikim that seem to live a life that would really be more for a Rasha? You'd expect the evil person to have a terrible life. You expect the righteous person to have a wonderful life. And yet I look at this righteous person and he's got all sorts of tzaras. And I look at this very evil person and he's having a great time. So Solomon says that is frustration. He's also frustrated with it. We're not the only ones that are frustrated with this question. King Solomon is saying frustration or emptiness, whatever you want to call it. And lastly, we have over here also in the Mishnah, Rabbi Yanai says, Rabbi Yanai says it is not our hands to explain the reason either security of the wicked or even the afflictions of the righteous. Meaning to say again, Rabbi Yanai says, I don't understand it. What is going on over here? You have righteous people who have a hard time. You have wicked people who have a wonderful time, and something doesn't seem to add up. And therefore we see over here, this is a question that's being asked, sorry, I don't know if I'm in the way here. This is a question that's being asked again and again over here, and that's the question that we want to try to figure out, try to see if we can get a bit of an understanding about this. So, this is again not working, we'll move on. So in order to get to this question, you have to make certain assumptions in this question. Does anybody want to harbor a guess? What assumptions are basic assumptions that need to be made in order to ask the question of why do bad things happen to good people? Anybody want to harbor any of the assumptions? A few axioms over here.
We don't see things.
Pardon?
We don't see things. Who knows who people are, really?
Oh, we'll come back to that. No, but I'm asking you the question. The question is predicated on certain factors, on certain assumption. The question, why do bad things happen to good people, is predicated on certain things. Yeah, go on. You were going to say something first, and come back to you, Rachel.
We know that what we think is prospering.
Okay, well, fine. All right, well, we'll have to come to that. That might be one of them. I might be able to twist it a little bit. Rachel, what do you think?
That we are all equally able to do good and equally able to do bad.
So that's free will. So free will is not so much, that's not going to be part of this, but there are...
I don't mean like that. I mean that we've all got the same capacity.
Yes.
So like I'm built genetically in a way, I'm never going to run a marathon.
Right, okay.
So maybe spiritually, I'm never going to be able to do as much good as somebody else.
Okay.
What I'm saying is that for me, this is predicated on the fact that we're all able to do the same amount of good. And not
okay, I hear that, but not necessarily at Tracy.
That Hashem is benevolent.
Okay, so that's one of the points, okay? You have to say that Hashem is benevolent. Because if God is some kind of mean, vindictive kind of God, the question is, why do bad things happen to good people? Because God's really a horror. That's why. That's it. You can't ask a question, why do bad things happen to good people, when you're dealing with a horrible individual, right? It's like asking, why does Putin do stupid stuff? Why does he put his troops right outside Ukraine and then say, I'm not planning anything? Bring 150,000 troops there and say, they're just there for a holiday. What's wrong with you? Right? It's not normal. But people don't ask questions, why does he do these things? Because you realize you're dealing over here with some kind of ridiculous, twisted individual. So you don't ask questions on twisted individuals. Okay? So that's point number one, right? That God is fair. Okay? A bit more basic than that as well. Yeah, Russell.
We cannot understand the mind, or to use
He's there.
No, but then that's not what we're saying, because that will be the answer already. The question, why do bad things happen to good people, has to be predicated on the fact that we're trying to understand it. If I can't understand it, I can't ask the question. If I say, why do bad things happen to good people? We can't understand it. All right, well, end of question. But if I'm asking the question, then I'm assuming something else. Yeah.
Don't we have free will?
Okay, but the free will that's true, but it's not really going to make a difference so much to what's going to happen to you, because a lot of things that happen to you are not out of choice. The things, if somebody finds out they're ill, it's nothing to do with their free will. Sometimes you say, okay, the guy's been smoking for 30 years, it was sort of to be expected, but many times the bad things that happen to them they're not really connected to the free will. Yeah, go on, yeah.
That we're actually making the basic assumption and belief that there is a God.
Excellent, okay. That's the second point over here. That you have to believe that there is a God. Because if you don't believe there is a God, then what's the question? We'll come back to that soon. We'll see Richard Dawkins' opinion about that. If you don't believe that there is a God, then I ask you, why do bad things happen to good people? What's the answer? Tough luck.
Yeah.
Yeah? That's it. That's all you can say. You can't say, some people get better and some people get worse. Why? Pot luck. Luck of the draw, right? Okay, so that's usually the two assumptions. I have a third one that I added to it also. Yeah?
God has a reason for doing things.
Okay, so that's true. I didn't put that in there, but so that has to be part of it also. That God would have a reason for doing things, because otherwise, why are we asking the question? Why do bad things happen to good people? I think that will go back into fair. I think that God is benevolent, that He's fair, right?
God is perfection.
Okay, so that's the other thing. That God is perfection. We'll have to come back to that as well. In that God is perfection, so I'll put it in a different way, because I'm going to come to one of the famous answers that we're going to reject. But God is perfection will have to do with that. We'll come back to that, okay? So we'll say the three things now. So let me just put them on the board if we can. If that works. They are, number one, there is a God. Number two, He can make a difference, okay? That'll be the second one. That's when you talk about God as perfection. I'll come back to that. But I mean, you ask the question, why do bad things happen to good people? If God cannot help it, then there's no point in asking the question. Why do bad things happen to good people? I don't know. God's also saying, heck, I'm trying to stop this. These stupid things keep on happening and I can't stop it. I wish I could stop it as well, right? So number one, there's a God. Number two, that God can make a difference. And number three, that things are meant to be fair. Because again, if things aren't meant to be fair, so they're not meant to be fair. So you're asking me a question, why do some people have a harder life than others? Not fair. So you say, but it's not fair. Exactly, it's not fair. But I don't think it's fair, neither do I. And God says, I never said it had to be fair. But you're asking me a question, why do bad things happen to good people? You have to be assuming that things are going to be fair, because if they're not going to be fair, then you can't ask the question. Okay? Those are the three assumptions that we need to make over here. Now, we're going to move on to one of my least favorite people. Come on in. Hi, yes. Right? Okay, one of my least favorite people. Everybody know who this is? Just in case you don't know, this is Richard Dawkins. Okay? And here I'm going to read you a quote from Richard Dawkins. Number one, when we're speaking about there is a God, he says, nature is not cruel, only pitilessly indifferent. This is one of the hardest lessons for humans to learn. We cannot admit that things might be neither good nor evil, neither cruel nor kind, but simply callous, indifferent to all suffering, lacking all purpose. Okay? Do you see what he's saying over here? If you were to assume, now this man is a devout atheist, one of the biggest atheists in the world today, written many, many books about it. I think we spoke about him in some of the previous talks. Right? So this man says, look, there is no God. So therefore, what do we have? We only have what's called nature. So is nature going to be good or bad? Is nature cruel? Is nature nice? He says these are all words that you use to describe a power, not something that just happens. If nature is something that just happens, and this is what he's assuming, nature just happens, you cannot describe it as cruel. You can just say it happens. And that's one of the hardest lessons for us, well, not only to learn, but really to swallow. It's not that to learn. You can learn the lesson very easily, but it's very hard to swallow. That means, you know what? This friend of mine that I know that's doing really, really badly, why is he doing so badly? There is no reason for it whatsoever. So isn't that cruel? No, it's not cruel. Luck of the draw. For some people, nature works better, and for some it works worse. But it's not that nature is being nicer or not nice as anybody else. Nature is nature. There's no nice and not nice to be talking about. Okay? So as you can see, he who does believe in God says there is no God, therefore there's no question to be asked about why bad things happen to good people, because nature just does its thing and you can't ask the question. That's point number one. Point number two is actually, there's a fellow by the name of Harold Kushner, conservative rabbi, who wrote this famous book that sold 4 million copies worldwide. And he wrote it after losing his son Aaron to progeria. Progeria seems to be an aging disease. So it seems that somebody ages much, much quicker than they're supposed to, and his son died at the age of 11. And he really, really struggled with the question. He says, God, you took my son away from me. How could you do such a thing? Which is a great question. You know what? That is a very, very deep, tragic question. And therefore, he wrote the book over here, When Bad Things Happen to Good People. And in it, he posits that God is limited and can stop bad things happening. He says, the only way that I can put together the idea of a benevolent God who took away my child at the age of 11 and let them suffer for so many years, there's only one way that I can square that circle. And that is by saying God has no choice. He couldn't stop it, because if he could have, he would have. And if he didn't, he's powerless to do anything. So therefore, that is the second thing. So as you can see, God is, number two, is control of everything. That is, there's a very, and as you can see, there are many, many people, 4 million people bought this book. That's, it's a real bestseller. It made its way up on the New York bestseller, international bestseller, it says over here. It says over 4 million copies sold. That's what it says actually on the, if you could see it better, it's not as clear on the screen. But that means this man put forward the idea that God is limited. Now, in our understanding, by the way, of God, that goes back to what Russell said. When we speak about God being perfect, part of perfect is A, perfect knowledge. That means God knows everything that's going on. Okay, you can't say, oh, God missed that one. Oops. Right? We can go, oops, I missed it. Right? God's never going to go, oops, I missed it, because that's part of our understanding that God is unlimited, that God is infinite. Number two, in God's infinity, it means that he also has the power to do anything that he wants to. Because if he can't, that makes him not infinite. If he's not infinite, then there's no point in serving him anyway. Okay? That just makes him somebody slightly more powerful than us, but not infinite, not God. Okay? But that is, so it's interesting that you have over here somebody who is a rabbi that posits this. But that's the second idea. And here comes the third one. Back to Richard Dawkins again. But I put a stress on something that he didn't put in. I sort of italicized these words over here. So let me read this to you. So what it says is, in a universe of electrons and selfish genes, blind physical forces and genetic replication, some people are going to get hurt, other people are going to get lucky. And you won't find any rhyme or reason in it, nor any justice. Can you see what he's saying? All right, I put that in the italics. But if you're looking for justice, justice is not to be found in pure chance. You cannot look for justice in chance. You can only look for justice where there's plan and purpose. Okay? And therefore, somebody who doesn't believe in God says, look, I don't have to come up with an idea why things are fair, why things aren't fair. They're not fair. But who are you asking fair or not fair to? The atoms, the neutrons, the protons, the genes that are inside you? Tough. It is what it is. You're just going to have to deal with it. Right? So that is the three things that we're saying. Those are the three that are predicated. As you can see, there are others that say this is not a question because of those points. But we are asking the question. He says don't ask the question because question doesn't make sense anyway. But we are asking the question. So if we're asking the question, we want to now understand it. Okay? So we get to the next one. This is also a very, very important point. If you don't have the answer to this question, what does it mean? Okay? So for some people, it means the following. There is no God. But is not logically correct. Just because I cannot understand the question, how bad things happen to good people, does that therefore prove to me conclusively that there is no God? It doesn't need to prove that, because it can mean a number of things. It could mean either, as Kushner says, he's not all-powerful and therefore he can't stop it. There is a God, he's just not all-powerful. So you might say, well, okay, that's not what I describe as God, but fine, let's work with that. Or we could say, again, lacking in the perfection that Russell spoke about, he doesn't know what's going on. So he doesn't know what's going on, he can't stop it. Or we could even say, he's not fair. God's not fair. Your idea of this nice, benevolent grandpa God that's sitting in, and handing out sweets to everybody and doing only nice things, that's a fairy tale. That doesn't exist. That's what you thought it was, but it's not really like that. Or, which somebody said before, I don't understand God because He is beyond me. The fact that I don't understand why God's system of justice works a certain way or doesn't work a certain way is not proof of the non-existence of God. It is only proof of my own limitation. And anybody says anything that I don't understand, I will not do, ask yourself the question, why did I get a vaccine? Right? How many people here really understand what the vaccine is? Well, no, I don't understand the whole RNA sequencing of what they're doing, etc., etc. And how many of you had? 2, 3, some of you might have had 4. You've all had it based on somebody else's word. Somebody says, no, this is okay. Now, there are other people that say, no, it's no good and it's going to kill you and you're going to get all sorts of things. I mean, honestly, this is a true story that happened to me. I had a fellow that walked over to me and he said to me, excuse me, have you had vaccines? I said, yeah. He said, how many have you had? I said, I've had 3. I had to go to Israel. I got a 3rd one. He says, amazing. You're just the guy I'm looking for. And he pulls out his mobile phone and he stands right next to me and he starts scrolling on his phone. And I say, what are you doing? And he says to me, I watched a video that shows that if you've had 3 vaccines, you will show up on the Bluetooths on my phone. I'm not making this up. I said, really? I'd love to see this. He goes, yeah, look at this. Are you 9321? I'm like, do I look like 9321 to you? Like, why should I be 9321? He goes, I don't know, but I'm not finding you on this. It's the only Bluetooth device on this thing that I find is 9321. So I'm like, he's like, so either he was wrong, but here comes the thing. Here comes the cracker. He goes, no, I don't have a smartphone. But let me borrow your phone. Maybe on your phone it'll show. I'm like, all right, come on. Let's do this. Meanwhile, I have a whole crowd around me, standing around me, and I pull out my smartphone and I open it up and it says, here, we'll turn on the Bluetooth. He goes, oh, 9321. Is that you? I'm like, no, that was on your phone also. He goes, what else? There's nothing else here. I'm like, yeah. He goes, that means you don't show up on the Bluetooth. I'm like, maybe there was something wrong with the vaccines that I got. He's like, no, but I don't understand it. I saw a video. You should be showing up on the Bluetooth. So I said to him, I decided to pull his leg, and that was the end of the conversation. I said, listen, I've had the vaccines. Nothing's gone wrong, Anyway, everybody else laughed. The fellow walked away, and I'm like, what an idiot. You know what I mean? Show up on your Bluetooth? Now, again, there are people that actually believe this. But we're all taking these vaccines. We don't understand it. I don't understand it, but I know that the medical advice has been to take them, so I took them, right? And the many people that are fighting about it, we know there's all the arguments going on. But the fact that I don't understand it is just because it's beyond me, but not because it doesn't exist or it doesn't work. Okay? So there are many people that are making the assumption that because I don't have the answer to the question, therefore there is no God. That is a flawed assumption. That's not correct. Okay? Now, I want to come to the very important point. And that is we have a huge problem when it comes to this. And I've told the story before, but I'll tell it again. I'm not sure everybody in this room is. I'm not sure there are a lot of people in this room that haven't heard this story. I've told this story. This happened to me many years ago. And I learned something very, very valuable when that story happened. And what happened was as follows. I went to a funeral. I don't even remember whose funeral it was, but I do remember where I was. I was in Failsworth. And I'm in the middle of this funeral, and what happens is, you all know, you have like everybody comes in, and you say the Tehillim, and you say the Hesped, you say the eulogy, and then you make your way out. So we make your way out of the Ohel, and you start walking down that path, and this woman comes over to me, she says to me, excuse me, yeah? She says, are you Lubavitch? I'm like, what? Are you Lubavitch? You mean Lubavitch? I said, yeah. No, I'm not Lubavitch. What? She says, well, I don't like Lubavitch. I'm like, fine. You mean like, if you don't like them, you don't like them. But like, I don't know what you want from me. I'm in the middle of trying to conduct a funeral. I don't need to have your religious preferences right now. That's not really. I said, listen, I'm in the middle of doing a funeral over here. Maybe we can talk about this later. She says, fine, no problem. We conducted the funeral. I went back. I washed my hands. We had the line. The mourner sat down. And the woman comes over to me after. She goes, okay, here we go. Why I don't like Lubavitch. I'm like, okay, humor her. Go ahead. She says to me, listen, I had a brother who married out and lived in Spain with his non-Jewish wife. I said, right. And unfortunately, he had some kind of accident and he died. I said, that's terrible. I'm really sorry to hear that. She says, yeah, now when he died, there was a discussion of what we should do with his body. Should he be buried with his non-Jewish friends and his wife wanted to bury him there so that when she dies, she'll be buried there next to him. She'll be buried in Spain in non-Jewish cemetery. Or what we can do is we could do it the other way around. We could bring him to England and bury him in a Jewish cemetery, or bury him in a Jewish cemetery in Spain. And the Lubavitch Shaliach that seemed to have lived there called her up and started pestering her. You have to bring him home. You have to bring him to Kvuras Yisrael. You have to give him a Jewish burial. Don't let this man be buried in a, don't do this to him. It's so terrible, etc., etc. And this is basically what happens. And she's back and forth with the guy. And in the end, basically what she did was she buried the fellow in Spain in a non-Jewish cemetery. I'm like, right. And she says, and that's why I dislike Lubavitch, because this fellow at the time of great sorrow came over to me and drove me crazy. And so I said to him, I really, really feel for you. I'm sorry to hear that. She goes, yeah, that's why I don't like them, but I'm glad that you're not Lubavitch. But let me ask you the question. Rabbi, so did I do the right thing or did I do the wrong thing? Okay? Question. Now, you're in a catch-22 in this situation. Why? Because if I say you did the right thing, I'm lying to her. Right? I don't want to lie to this woman. And as a rabbi, I don't think it's right for me to be actually falsifying Torah. I need to give over the correct story. I can't tell the story in a different way. I can't say, well, yeah, you know what? I feel bad for you. You can do that. That's not my way. That's not our way as Orthodox Jews. Well, then the only other option that I have is to tell her that she was wrong. Which I'm sure she's not going to want to hear, but I'll have to say it. So I braced myself and I said, listen, I'm really sorry to tell you that, but you did the wrong thing. What then at that point happened is something I couldn't have foreseen, and maybe now with years of hindsight I could look back and say that was a stupid thing to do. But what happened was the following. She looks at me and she says, I can't believe you're saying that. And she runs into the corner and starts sobbing out loud. And I'm standing there in a room full of people with this woman sobbing in the corner. And I'm thinking to myself, oh my goodness, what did you just do? And her husband comes up and goes, don't worry, she's done this often. I'm like, all right, that's your problem, not mine. But I'm thinking to myself, what did I do? Or how would it, by the way, after, I ended up afterwards, I thought about it, and I said to myself, I made a big mistake over there. And the mistake that I made was the following. Really, in reality, what should have I said to this woman? Anybody know?
Teach your later somewhere else.
Excellent, right? You say to the woman, exactly that. You can say to her, listen, this is a really difficult question. I don't think I can answer it here. I need to really think about this. Why don't you take my card and give me a call tomorrow, day after, and we can make an appointment. You can come and meet me in my office. How many of you think she actually would have come to my office? No, she wouldn't have come, right? She was asking a question because I was available. But if she was that interested, I don't think she would have come. And I could have just easily said to her, listen, come a different time. And that would have done the job, and I would have had a great, life would have been much easier that way. But I was young, I was stupid, and I said the wrong thing. And the problem over there is what I learned, is that if you're trying to solve an emotional question with a logical answer, you will get yourself into trouble. There are many husbands in this room that have tried this to no avail. Really? What? Never. Not me. No, I'm the. But that's what happens. Sometimes the question is not a question. And not only that, sometimes it's very callous to do that. So imagine if you knew somebody, okay, I'm giving a very extreme example. But imagine if I've seen people do this and it's awful. You'll see somebody that's sitting shiva. And somebody else sits down and tries to explain to them logically how this is the best thing for them. Do you not sit there sort of like cringing in your seat and thinking to yourself, you have no manners at all. You don't know how to deal with people. Now you might say to yourself, but he's right. Maybe logically speaking he's right. He might be giving the right answer. What's the answer? There's a time and place for everything. And when somebody is going through pain, they don't want to know why it makes sense. Because even if you can explain to them why it makes sense, it rarely makes them feel any better. I know I wouldn't feel any better. You know, oh, it makes sense now. I guess now then I deserve to have pain. All right, thank you, God. Rarely is that going to be the answer. Most people are just going to be very, very upset and very annoyed. Annoyed at the person for doing it, and it's not gotten them any closer to God. And so you have to be very, very careful. When this question is being asked, and it is asked, I wouldn't say often, but it is asked quite often, you have to know the person who's asking the question is asking, you know, are they asking because they themselves are going through a personal trauma at this time? Because if the answer to that question is yes, you should not be attempting to answer this question. Because when a person says, why is God doing this to me? What do they want really? Sympathy. They don't want an answer. They want sympathy. And by giving them an answer, that's the last thing that you're doing. You're not sympathizing with them. You're actually being extremely callous by trying to tell them, oh, I know why it happens. Oh, thank you very much. Okay? So you got to be very, very careful. This is the huge pitfall in this question. You need to know who you're dealing with and who you're speaking to. So do not try to solve an emotional question with a logical answer. So having said that, we're still going to give some of the possible responses that are brought in Jewish thought, even though, as I said, you have to know when to use them and when not to use them. Okay, so we have some of the possible answers over here. Some of the possible answers, these aren't all of them, but let's go through them. Number one, we don't know who is righteous or evil in this world. How many of us have seen people that we thought were really, really nice people, and then you realize that, wait a second, they're not anywhere near as nice as I thought, and sometimes they turn out to be actually pretty horrible people. I know that personally, I know people that afterwards, when you find out who they are and what they've done, you feel so let down. Have you not met people where you feel so let down that they project one way, and then when you get to know them better, you realize they're not really nice. They're not really good people. So when you ask the question, why do bad things happen to good people? You are assuming now that you know who is a good person and who's not a good person. Okay? And that, by the way, the other point on that to be mentioned over there is that you need to know that with absolute knowledge. That means not from my knowledge, because I don't know anybody 100%. I think the person that I know best is my wife, and even then I would say I don't know her 100%, as she doesn't know me 100%. Because in the end of the day, there's still aspects of you that don't always show. And there's parts of you that are just in your mind that you don't share with somebody else. And they might not know everything that goes on inside of you. The only power that can say 100% about an individual that they are 100% good or that they are 100% evil, and, with absolute certainty, is God. Nobody else will ever know. We can say in general, I know this person, and in general they're a very nice person, and I know this person in general, they seem to be quite horrible, but even then that's only generality. I cannot tell. And we can come back to the point that Rachel made. I think Rachel made it. I'm not sure if Rachel or Elaine made it before, about different people's abilities, right? So you made that point, Rachel, right? So that there are certain people that within their abilities, this is as far as they can get. So you say, but that's not great comparatively to other people. Yeah, but for them that's fantastic, right? So that's number one, okay? Point number two, many of the things that we see as evil aren't necessarily as bad, and vice versa. It's hard for me to say this, but I'll say this only because I heard it from the person who actually said it. So my sister, 16, how many years ago is that now? 2005. Almost 17 years ago, 16.5 years ago. Remember, my wife and I were expecting our second son, and my sister was expecting her first child as well. And their child was due a month before ours, and when the child was born, I remember where I was, and I called on my brother-in-law, and you asked the question, and it rolls off your tongue, mother and baby well, and he says to me, the child's got Down syndrome. The first child, and my brother-in-law was 31, he waited 10 years to get married, he'd gone out, he'd had already quite a journey, and it was very, very difficult for them. And the first few months were extremely, extremely difficult. But my sister, 3.5 years ago at the bar mitzvah, got up and spoke. And she said it with tears in her eyes, and everybody in the room was crying with her because it was very, very moving. Because she says, sometimes you look at something and you think to yourself, what am I going to do with this? Why did God deal me this card? Such a hard card. And then she says, but I look back at this now and I say, it was Pasha Shlach Lecha, when we speak about the land of Israel, and she said, Tovah ha'aretz me'od me'od, the land is exceedingly good. That is what the spies said, the two spies that gave the good report. And she says, I look at everything that's happened, and I'm standing here at the bar mitzvah of my son who has this limitation, and I say, God, this is a wonderful gift. I wouldn't look back, and I wouldn't change it, and I wouldn't do anything different. But she wouldn't have said that on the first day after having the baby, or the second day after having the baby, because there was a shock. There were things. So you say when that child was born, it was a crisis. It was a crisis in our family, it was a crisis for my parents, it was a crisis for their, for them as a couple, a crisis amongst the siblings. We all had our piece to make with it. But looking back, they see it not so much as a crisis, but they see it as a blessing. And they're able to look at it and to say, you know what? That's not necessarily bad, even though I thought it was. And certain things, people think they win the lottery, that's the greatest thing that can happen to them. Statistically speaking, most people that win the lottery are, after 5 years, bankrupt, divorced, on drugs, and in worse trouble than they've ever been before in their life. The statistics show that at least 50% of people. So when somebody wins it, they call it a life-changing amount of money. That's what they like to call it in this country. You win a life-changing amount of money. Not always a life-changing, the life-changing for positive. It could be life-changing in a very, very negative way. And people, when they win the money, they're like, I'm the luckiest man alive, I won 100 million pounds. Yeah, until 2 years later when everything falls apart. Then you say, I shouldn't have won this, I wish I would have given it away. Okay? So that's the second thing. Number 3. Getting punished in this world for sin so there won't be punishment in the next world. We have, and this is part of our understanding of the world, is that God, there are two worlds. We've been sent into this world, and we need to make up in this world. We have sins that we do over here. We have good deeds that we do over here. We will get rewarded for the good deeds that we do over here. We will get punished for the sins that we do over here as well. However, punishment here is cheap compared to punishment up in heaven. And God says, I can send you punishment here. It's not going to be fun, but I guarantee you it's much, much easier than it is then. Right? So, for example, if you have to make certain payments, early on when you're just starting out working, you're 20 or 25 years old and you just got a job and you have to make a pension payment and you're like, why am I making this pension payment? It's such a pain and it's taking so much money out of my salary and I wish I could just hold on to the money. But then if you had to try doing the same thing at 60 and starting a pension pot at 60, you don't even stand a chance. And that few £100 that you set aside at age 25 is suddenly worth a fortune because you push yourself at age 25. When it's easy, you push yourself when it's hard, it's going to cost you. Okay? Now, you're getting tested for extra reward in the next world. It could be that you've not done any sins, but God says there's extra credit to be gained. Extra tests give extra credit. Sometimes you get 100%. I remember there were extra assignments that I did in school, and I got 110% on certain things. Okay? Now, it's also to teach others about accepting their lot in this world. Some people, that you look at somebody else. Some people struggle with their lot in the world terribly. And you see them and they always look like they're bearing the weight of the world on their shoulders. Whereas you see other people that look very happy, even though they have tzaras. And you can look at these people, and I sometimes look at these people in amazement that have all sorts of problems and can still wake up in the morning and smile and be happy and look at everyone. And you say, you know what, I can learn something from that person. And that person will receive a tremendous reward because he's teaching the rest of the world that just because your car doesn't look the way you want it to be, doesn't mean that I have to be upset. I can still be happy, or I can still be content, and I can still try to live with it. And lastly, this one's a very big one, is reincarnation, also known as Gilgul, that sometimes in a previous life, God sends down a neshama, He sends down a soul a second time to make up for mistakes that it's done in the past. And sometimes the suffering that you've done now is not deserved to you because you deserve it in this life, but for something that you've done previously where you deserve a punishment. So you say, but why do I deserve to suffer because my previous soul did whatever it did? That's God's calculations and not my calculations. Okay? Those are some of the possible answers. There are other answers. But I'd like to mention something very important over here. And that the Chavos HaVavos, the duties of the heart, says the following. He says, we don't have a definitive answer. So if somebody asks you, so why am I suffering? I gave you 5 or 6 reasons before, and there are more reasons as well. So somebody says, so why am I suffering? What's the answer that I can give them? Is there any answer I can give them? The answer is, I don't know. It can be one of many things. And therefore he says, the prophet refrained from giving an answer because each specific case has its own particular reason. Meaning there's no general answer which includes everything. We were asking a person about you put 5 people in the room that have the same tsaras, have the same problems. Why do each one of these 5 people have this tsaras? The first person could have for reason A, the second person for reason B, and the third person because A and B together, and the fourth person because of C. So which one is it? I don't know, you don't know, nobody knows. So why does the prophet say, why do bad things happen to good people? We can't say why, we can say in general, bad things happen to good people because of one of a list of reasons. But if you want to ask the question more specifically, why did this bad thing happen to me or happen to my friend? The answer to that question is going to be, I don't know. I can venture a guess based on a whole bunch of list of things, but I don't really know. And therefore, the last thing that I'm going to say over here is, I'm going to say 2 more things, and we're going to finish with that, and then any questions, you can ask your questions. So why doesn't God tell us then? Okay? And here there are 2 points I'd like to make. Number 1, we don't do well with the truth. And we all know this to be true actually. Okay? Have you ever bought something new? Especially ask this to the women in the crowd. Have you ever bought something new and asked your husband for his opinion and he's been too brutally honest about it? And you think to yourself, and why did you say that? And he's like, you asked me my opinion and I gave you my opinion, and then when I give you my opinion, you get angry with me. That's not fair. Like, no, you didn't have to say it like that. I mean, you have to call me like, you don't have to say I look like a sack of potatoes. They say you could be blinding a guy, you blind a deaf guy on the street. What are you doing? Wearing this thing. We don't do well with those kind of comments. We still would like to have diplomacy. We don't do well with the truth. And that's true for all sorts of things. When we get, I don't know about you, but when somebody comes to me and tells me the truth, it hurts. It's not easy to swallow always. When people tell you, you've made a mistake over here, you've been callous like that, you've not done this, it's not easy to swallow. Yes, okay, we all as adults have to learn how to swallow these things, but it's not easy. And so we don't do well with the truth. And more importantly, I remember saying this, I remember being at somebody's house 10 years ago, 11 years ago, 10 years ago, when there was an individual in our shul that was very, very ill, and he had cancer, and he says to me, Rabbi, why? Why? And I remember I said to the fellow, I had this thought then at the time, and I believe this to be true, and if you don't agree with it, that's fine, but I believe this to be true. I said, I don't know why, but I highly doubt that even if I could tell you why, that you'd feel any better about it. Okay? Imagine the following scenario, okay? The guy says to me why, and I'm making it up. This is not why. Please just don't, just take this as an example and don't nitpick at it. But somebody says to me, Rabbi, I have cancer and I'm dying. Why am I dying? And I said to him, you remember all the times you didn't come to shul? That's why. Or you remember all the lashon hara that you spoke of all your time in this world? God is punishing you now, so you receive a reward in the world to come. How many of you in this room feel better? Go like, Rabbi, thank you so much for that answer. It's so wonderful to know. You know what? I wish I would have never spoken that lashon hara. Gosh, it would have been so easy to come to shul and I didn't do it. That was stupid of me. Well, I guess now I deserve it. How many of us would say that? And how would I say, that's the reason? Do you know that you have 500 people in the shul that never show up to shul? I at least come once a month. They all don't have cancer and I have cancer. That's fair? And you want to talk lashon hara? Oh, I'll show you my friends. You think I talk lashon hara? I'll show you 10 of my friends that speak much worse than I do. Where's the fairness in that? God, that's not right. I get it because I spoke lashon hara. What about all the other people that speak lashon hara? So if I gave you the true answer, imagine I was a prophet. I'm not, but imagine I was a prophet and I said, but that's the true answer. That's what God told me. Is that going to sit well with you? Or are you going to say it's still not fair? Even if you knew the truth, because we don't accept the truth, we don't do well with the truth, even if I knew the truth, I would sit there and I would say to myself, find that hard to swallow. I'd find it hard to swallow. I don't know about you, but I would find it hard to swallow. If somebody told me the true reason, I'd say, come on, that's it? That's why? There must be a better reason. But the last point over here is to bring us to action. And I'm going to read you a quote. I didn't put it up specifically, but I'm going to read it for myself over here now. And I'll read you the quote as follows. I saw this on a website, a Chabad website. And
Sorry.
hi, Adaz.
Hello, sorry.
And here we go. Here's the quote, and I'll finish with this. If this ultimate question were answered, then we would be able to make peace with the suffering of the innocent. And that's unthinkable. Worse than innocent people suffering is others watching their suffering unmoved. And that's exactly what would happen if we were to understand why innocents suffer. We would no longer be bothered by the cry. We would no longer feel the pain, because we would understand why it's happening. Somebody else is crying, big deal. I know why. It's fair, right? When you have an explanation, pain doesn't seem so bad anymore. We can tolerate suffering when we know why it's happening. And so, if we could make sense of innocent people suffering, if we could rationalize tragedy, then we could live with it. We'd be able to hear the cry of sweet children in pain and not be horrified. We would tolerate seeing broken hearts and shattered lives, for we'll be able to neatly explain that away. Our questions will be answered and we can move on. But as long as the pain of innocence remains a burning question, we are bothered by its existence. And as long as we can't explain pain, we must alleviate it. If innocent people's suffering does not fit into our worldview, we must eradicate it. Rather than justifying their pain, we need to get rid of it. So keep asking the question, why do bad things happen to good people? But stop looking for answers. Start formulating a response. Take your righteous anger and turn it into force for doing good. Redirect your frustration with injustice and fairness, and channel into the drive to fight injustice and unfairness. Let your outrage propel you into action. When you see innocent people suffering, help them. Combat the pain in the world with goodness. Alleviate suffering wherever you can. We don't want answers. We don't want explanations. And we don't want closure. We want an end to suffering. And we dare not leave it up to God to alleviate suffering. He is waiting for us to do it. That's what we're here for. Thank you. And now the difficult part. Questions? Yeah, oh, sorry, I didn't realize. Sorry, yeah.
I haven't got a question so much, Rabbi, but I mean, from my perspective, I just think that we're here. And from that point onwards, we've got everything within our abilities to do whatever.
Right.
And it's down to us. We've been provided with the tools. And it's not a matter of just saying, always expecting it to be given, whether it's good or bad.
Okay, so there is that also. I was going to speak about that sometimes our pain and suffering is our own doing. But many times our pain and suffering is not our own doing. And when it's not our own doing, we can say, you know what, I've lived a good life. And yet somebody very close to me has gotten ill. Or I have a certain illness, or I got something wrong with me. And why did that happen? And that's already not up to me. So whilst I take your point, and in many instances you can create your own destiny by doing the right things, in certain instances the question is still warranted. So that's, there are, but yes, I take the point. Yeah, Russell, you look like you're about to ask something.
So when we learned Derek Hashem for 2.25 years, one of the things that Ramchal says is that although wicked people, non-righteous people, get rewarded here.
Yes.
If you get rewarded in the world to come, it's infinite, whereas here it's finite and it's a fleeting. So they might have, they might win the lottery for, 10 years, then they die, and that's the end of it.
Yes.
Whereas if you get rewarded, so it's in a way it's trying to appease our concerns.
Right. So it's interesting. I learned that Ramchal also, and the point that I think might be true, might not be true, and you can disagree with this one, is, are people more bothered when bad things happen to good people, or they're more bothered by good things happen to bad people? I find that the former is what bothers people a lot more. You rarely find a book, why do good things happen to bad people? You don't find that so much, because people aren't really so bothered. Let him have whatever he has. I think oftentimes, I was discussing with this guy today, when people ask the question, why do bad things happen to good people, people are often referring to themselves. Or they're referring to somebody very near to them. And, okay, I'm opening up a whole can of worms over here. But if you're so bothered by why bad things happen to good people, are you going all around the world to change all the bad things that are happening to so many decent people? There are people that were living in starvation, and there are women that are living in terrible brutality. And there are all sorts of terrible things that are going on around the world. And we don't, you listen to it on the news, you turn off the news as if nothing happened. You know, is there any righteous indignation about what's happening in Ukraine at all? Do you turn off the news and say, I hate this Putin, and what's he doing to the world, and why, you know? Very few people are I'm going to turn this off.
But is that not in part? I really like that last quote. To me, that is one of the reasons I think that bad things happen to good people, so that we can do good things.
Yeah. So there is that element in it, especially when it comes to charity. So, you know, there's a famous Gemara where the Gemara says, somebody came to Rabbi Akiva and says, if your God loves the poor people, why doesn't he feed them? Right? You know, and the assumption is that God's meant to be feeding them. And he said, well, no, the reason God hasn't given them the money is because given all us the opportunity to provide them with charity. That's our opportunity to make the difference. And that's exactly what you're saying. That sometimes the suffering that's going to be brought upon certain people is there for us to make the difference and for us to make the change. And in certain instances we can, and we should try to do that as much as we can. In certain instances we can't, but we can at least be there to be the moral support for them. Yeah?
I was going to say, if the reason for good things and bad things happening was blindingly obvious, would we still have free will?
We wouldn't. No, that's part of it also. So that's part of the entire thing. So if only good things happen to good people and only bad things happen to bad people, what would you end up seeing? Everybody's going to turn good. There's no point in being bad. If a bad person walks out the door and gets hit by a car, and every bad person happens to, one way or another you say to yourself, you know what? I fancy speaking Lashon Hara, but you know what? The last 6 people I know got into a terrible accident. So this morning is going to be coming a non-Lashon Hara morning. I don't fancy a car all over me. Yeah? That gets rid of your free will. There's no point then in having... So it's 100% correct. That's part of it. In order to have free will, then the Mefarshim speak about this. In order to be able to have free will, there needs to be some times where the people that you expect to get good don't get it, and the people that you expect to get bad will get a reward even though you don't think they deserve it.
Rabbi,
Yeah.
the big question, of course, is 6 million souls.
Okay, so the Holocaust is a separate... I don't want to get into the Holocaust now. It's a separate talk. I could do a talk on the Holocaust, but I don't want to... I don't think it's right. I don't think it's right to sort of give a soundbite about it. So I'm gonna say I'm happy to do that talk at one point or another. I'm gonna leave it as such that the question is excellent. The answers, are varied, and there are different people that take different approaches to it. And I looked into it a little bit today. I was consider bringing it in, and I thought, you know what? If you're not going to deal with it properly, then you're going to open up Pandora's box, and you're just going to leave more questions than answers. So I raise my hands and I say, excellent. I'm not going to answer tonight, but if you want to, we can arrange for that. Yes, Annette.
I found it confusing. One of the quotes was, "You never know anybody 100%."
Yes.
And I think even the most evil person must have some good about them.
Yes.
Yeah, that's a bit of a cop-out, really, isn't it? To say that some of the most evil people around them make terrible things, torture people, and nobody can say anything good about them. They're good to their family, they're not good to their, their citizens or anything.
Yeah.
They might do one good thing, and that negates all the evil that they've done.
That doesn't negate all the evil that they've done. No, I'm not saying that negates all the evil that they've done. I think that, there'll be people that we can say almost unequivocally that they're evil people. But there are good things that they've done in their life, and they can get some kind of reward for the goodness that they've done. Right? Even someone as evil as Hitler, even someone as evil as Stalin, they might have done nice things to their children. They might have been good to their dogs. They might have been nice to their wife at times, right? Does that make them good people? Far from it. Don't get me wrong. I'm not here to extol the virtues of either of those people. May they burn in hell for eternity, right? No, I mean it, right? They should, right? But nobody is all evil. Nobody is 100% evil. Even those people, they must have done certain things in their life that were positive. Now, compared to the myriads of evil things that they do, nobody's ever going to describe these people as nice people. Hitler's still a nasty piece of work, even if he treated his wife nicely, which I don't know if he did or if he didn't. But, even if he did, nobody would say, such a nice guy. Look at the shalom bayis that he has. But that's, so we're not saying that's the mitigating factor, so to say. When I see evil people that have certain goodness in their life, we could say, there might be certain good things that they've done because they're not 100% evil, and for that little bit of goodness, they're getting rewarded now. But they remain evil people. Oh gosh, right, that's sort of open. Yeah, okay. Rachel was up first, then we'll move on to Richard, and then we'll move on to Michael.
We may not have time for this, and it's something that I don't quite understand, is in other religions they talk about Satan and Satan being the person that causes evil.
Right.
And I don't quite understand what we believe in that. So I know that we talk about the Satan,
Right.
and certainly Yom Kippur we pray.
Yes.
We don't think about the Satan. You know, there's some
The Siga Basatan. Yeah.
But
So
where does that fit into bad things happening?
no, so the Satan is different. That's an interesting question. The Satan is in other religions an archangel that's gone awry. He's gone AWOL, right? And he's doing his own thing. So in Christianity, for example, the Satan is doing his own thing, and God's like, hey, come back here, stop it. And he's like, doing my own thing. Right? So that's, but that's not the Jewish view. The Jewish view is that the Satan is actually an agent of God to test human beings. He says, I want human beings to go through a certain amount of tests, and he's got his job as well. He's got his job to try, we as human beings are being tested 24/7, all the time. We're constantly making moral judgments, whether you think about it or you don't think about it. Every second of your life, you're going to be making some form of a judgment. Am I doing this? Am I doing that? Should I be doing better things with my time? Am I just going to waste my time? You're basically all the time in your life, you can decide, what you're going to be doing. So the Satan is the one that's going to be constantly pulling you in the wrong direction. Their job is to pull you in the wrong direction, but it's God who sent them to pull you in the wrong direction. And he says, I've given you internal powers to be able to combat the Satan, whose job it is to pull you the other direction. But it's not the Satan that does bad things. I think the only time you read about that really, I think, is in Job. That's the only place where you see the Satan comes to God and says, I want to test him, and God says, go ahead. And the Satan goes and does all sorts of things. But in general, it's not the Satan that decides, I'm going to do something terrible to him, and God's not going to be able to do anything about it. That's a Christian idea that doesn't belong by us. Yeah, Richard.
I was just going to ask you, Rabbi, from your point of view, when you were learning, how much of this is a challenge to yourself as a rabbi? This fundamental question and your peers.
Okay, so I'll give you the following answer to that question. There was a rabbi who was sorry to answer with a story. There was a rabbi who was very wealthy, and he got this business deal, and it was a very, very lucrative deal. And he literally invested all his money in that deal. And what happened was, it was all this merchandise was on a ship, and the ship sunk. It just sank at sea, and that was it. All his money gone. And they came to the rabbi, and they didn't know what to do. And they came to the yeshiva was like, how are we going to tell the rabbi? Because this was in the olden days when there weren't phones yet. Right? Who's going to tell the rabbi? So one guy says, I'll tell the rabbi. He goes, all right. He walks over to the rabbi. He says, Rabbi, the Gemara, the Talmud tells us that you should make a blessing on all of the evil in the same way you make a blessing on all of the good. I don't understand it. The rabbi says, wait a minute. You believe there's a God? Yeah. You believe God's benevolent? Yeah. You believe God, everything that he does is good? Yeah. So you can make a blessing on the evil in the same way you make it good, because it's all good. He's like, no, but I don't get it. Explain that again to me. So he says, you believe there's a God? Yeah. They go through the whole thing twice, 3 times, 5 times, 10 times. He's like, you finally understand it? Yes, I understand it. I have to tell you something. He says, what? Your merchandise sank in the sea. The guy fainted. They finally revived him, and he woke up, and he says, you know what? It's not such a bad question after all. Yeah. Because you know what? When it's academic, it's a lot easier to learn it. I'm giving you an academic presentation over here. Baruch Hashem, I don't feel I'm going through terrible trouble in my life now. If I was, chas v'shalom, would I be able to stand here and say the same thing with the same kind of conviction? I might struggle with it a lot more. So, in my life, I've had struggles, but I think the struggles I've had, I don't think any of my struggles have been massive. And so I've never come to the point where I've really come to the question and said, why? But, and I'm hoping I never get to that point. So I can't say with absolute certainty that if I ever got a real big punch, that I won't turn around and say, you know what? I don't think I deserve that. Maybe I would. And I think that's normal. When people go through mourning, the Shiva, the Shloshim, it's normal for them to be able to digest and to be able to think about what happened to them and to say, you know what? It happened. It's very, very hard. And slowly but surely to come to terms with it. And that's the time of the mourning, is there to come to terms with it. For somebody, as soon as their relative has passed away, to say, I'm 100% okay with it, this was God's will. What are you, some kind of robot? Something wrong with you? Right? We don't expect that either. So the question is an interesting question, and I guess the answer for me is, Baruch Hashem, I've not been tested in that way yet, that I can actually say that, that how to weigh it up in that way. Michael, you had your hand up before. I thought you had your hand up before, sorry. Yeah, Russell.
It's interesting, again, going back to the Ramchal, that he says a righteous person is someone who does 51% good as opposed to 49%
Yes.
bad. And that makes him a righteous person. Then there's a scale.
There's scales, obviously, yeah.
But you're a righteous person if you do more good than you do bad.
Yeah, but that's only righteous in a certain sense. That means God, God's measuring the righteousness and not who goes into Gan Eden, who doesn't go into Gan Eden, who gets to go on the Neshamas. That's all going to be based on the 51-49, right? But that doesn't mean that you don't deserve a punishment for the 49 of evil that you have inside you, right? So that's what I'm saying. You might have done 50% good, but there's 49% bad inside you where punishments, etc., would still be warranted for that other percentage. And therefore, whilst you're considered righteous in general, there'll always be these other things that you've done that are not 100% right.
Is the bottom line we just have to have faith, if we have faith that there is God, that we don't know, we will not know, that we just have to not understand, just accept that this is God's way. And if you can believe that God is there, and it makes it easier to just accept that we don't know.
I think bottom line is I think bottom line.
The tapestry.
I think the bottom line of what you're saying is correct. This is all the sort of like the logic that goes behind it. You can say, well, why does God do it? You can give all these reasons. But the bottom line is going to come back down to what you said. I'm going to have to at one point or another say, you know what? I'm not in charge of this world. I'm not in charge of my own destiny, and God's in charge. And why do certain things happen to me? I don't know. I can give myself reasons and say God's not a nasty piece of work because of all the things that I mentioned before. But bottom line, why did it happen to me? It's still only because God knows. And that was that second to last quote that we gave. Well, the Chafetz Chaim said, there's no real answer to the question. God, no prophet can give you an answer to the question either, because every person's suffering is due to something else. And so you need to work it out according to that.
Are you saying that there's a redemptive quality in it?
There is a redemptive quality in suffering, absolutely. Yeah. There's a redemptive quality in suffering. Any suffering that you have in this world is going to then go against your account later on for any suffering that you... And the suffering, again, as I said, suffering in this world is much cheaper than it is to suffer in the next world. Because this world is finite, and whatever suffering we go through is terrible, and I'm not making light of it. But compared to the ultimate suffering that we'll get, and compared to the ultimate pleasure that you can get in the world to come, the suffering here in this world is much lighter, much easier. Right, we'll stop here. Thank you very much. Still have plenty of coffee, cakes, and drinks. Anybody wants to stay for longer, you're welcome to. And next week, Rabbi Shai Grunfeld is going to be speaking on the topic of the 7 wonders of Jewish history. So, see you next week. Thank you.